or views of the Eternal City. Here we have the Colosseum and the Piazza of St. Peter's Basilica. These works also include architectural studies and plans. Here are four of the caryatids in one of the prints. Plan of a gymnasia. Title pages, like this one for the Vedute. Frontispieces, also for the Vedute Part 2, as well as dedications. And examples from Piranesi's widely inventive series of grotesques and imaginary prisons. All of these speak to the artist's interest in bridging ancient and modern, past and present, across more than 1,000 designs to paradoxically construct a new urban imaginary, the influence of which we still today in our own imaginations of Rome. As Piranesi once reportedly remarked, I need to produce great ideas, and I believe that if I were commissioned to design a new universe, I would be mad enough to undertake it. As I hope the exhibition shows, the devil for Piranesi's newly constructed world is always in the details of his designs and etchings. I'd also like to say just a few words about the exhibition undertaking and practicum goals. As a hands-on curatorial project, the exhibition represents a close semester-long collaboration between students, mentors, and our valued institutional partners. The result was that my students were given the unique chance to work directly with important and often difficult materials, brand new to most of them. They learned how to select and handle fragile works that spoke to the exhibition concept, and how to engage in object-based research, interpretation, and didactic panel and label writing. They learned principles of exhibition design, display, installation, and programming, and most importantly, how to begin to think and ultimately create like professional curators. Most of all, I hope they learn to do what is at the etymological and historical foundations of curating, which is to care for objects, ideas, and histories, and along with them, each other too. I'd now like to take the opportunity to thank all of the student curators, my students. I so value you for caring, for your hard work, and invite you all to stand so we can give you a big round of applause. Today's panel was designed to offer a brief introduction and some initial points of personal and scholarly entry into these rich objects. Each of the panelists will offer a short response related to Piranesi's work or the panel's theme of constructing worlds from their own perspectives. We will then move to the conversation portion of the program with Diane and Nikki moderating. Finally, in the time remaining, the floor will be open to questions, and then we'll move to the gallery for the reception. Ultimately, our goal is to help open Piranesi's astounding creativity and technical skill for a new generation and highlight the continued relevance from perhaps surprising perspectives. And finally, before turning it over to the students, I'd like to extend the class's enormous thanks to Thacher Gallery Director Glory Simmons and to Head of Special Collections at the Donahue Rare Book Room, John Hawk, both of whom worked with my students and me, gosh knows, so generously across the semester, and to Dr. Stephanie Hayner of the Mills College Art Museum for being such a wonderful partner in this. I also want to sincerely thank the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Jeffrey Paris, Interim Associate Dean Kathy Gabor, Library Dean Sean Calhoun, Digital Collections Librarian Gina Solars, and the Thacher Gallery student staff, all of whom have been so supportive. And last but not least, I want to warmly thank Museum Studies Director Karen Fraser and Julianne Nublo. Where are you, Julianne? There she is in the back, for all their help as well. You've really made this process so much easier for all of us. I'd now like to invite Nikki to take it from here, and on behalf of my class, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for joining us for our panel discussion, Constructing Worlds from Piranesi's Rome to Digital Realms. My name is Nikki Aquino, and I am one of the co-curators of Piranesi's Rome and the Classical Imaginary. I'll also be your MC for this evening. This program will be divided into three major components. First, our three esteemed panelists, Professors Elizabeth Carroll, Tanu Sankalia, and Noopur Agarwal, will offer short presentations given their field of expertise and its relevance to our exhibition. We will then transition to a panel discussion with all three speakers, which will be moderated by Museum Studies student and fellow co-curator Diane and myself. Finally, we will dedicate the remaining time to a Q&A with the audience. And once the Q&A is concluded, as Kate mentioned, we will all transition to Thacher Gallery for the opening reception. So with that being said, it is my pleasure to first welcome Professor Elizabeth Carroll to the podium. Dr. Carroll is a senior lecturer in the Department of Art and Art History and Design at San Jose State University. She specializes in the art of early modern Venice and teaches Renaissance and Baroque, as well as design history survey courses. She has written articles on 16th century Venetian art and co-edited multi-author volumes on the early modern Italian domestic interior and the cultural history of furniture. Drawing from the design history classroom in 2023, she co-authored Environmental Equity for Students in the Library and LEED Buildings in practicing social justice in libraries, published by Routledge. Dr. Carroll's current research investigates and reconsiders the preponderance of export and local lacquers found in early modern Venice through the 18th century. The current title of this project is The Global Entanglements of Lacquer. Thank you for being here, Dr. Carroll, and the stage is now yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me this evening. It's wonderful to be a part of this group tonight. So, as we explore the theme of constructing worlds this evening, and as a way to dialogue with Piranesi's Rome and the Classical Imaginary, it's clear that the curators, the USF Museum Studies graduate student and Professor Thacher, inspire us to rethink, to revision the imaginative output of this Venetian native. So while this might seem paradoxical to Piranesi's Romanitas, or mature sense of Romanness as transmitted through his etchings of the eternal city, I would like to first respond to Piranesi's Venetian beginnings, based on a few works in the show, and how Piranesi's Venice contributed to the intensity of his creative output and speaking ruins. So the powerful blend of fluctuating light, monumentality that we see in his etching language, I would like to think is very much tied in part to his Venetian origins. So scholars have speculated on the formative influences shaping his mental horizon in terms of attentiveness to architecture and the unique city topography. And I'd like to show you a couple of examples moving back before the 18th century. As art historians, we want to consider the collective memory and the long tradition of city views in Venice. And thinking that, of course, it has its genesis in what we like to call eyewitness style painting, long ago termed by Patricia Fortini Brown, for instance. We think of the architectural capriccio in its infancy stages, and here I'm showing you narrative paintings that capture thinking of through the eyes of Renaissance painters like Carpaccio, Lazzaro Bastiani, or Giovanni Mansueti, which I show you here. Or closer in time, from connecting to the generation just before Piranesi, Canaletto or Antonio Visentini were among the first to produce painted realistic city views of the architecture in Venice. And Visentini would go on to engrave and etch perspective views of the city based on Canaletto's paintings. So closer we see here to home, we consider Piranesi's background in Venice, from near Venice, that is Mogliano Veneto. We think of his father, who was from Pirano, Istria. For Venice, that area was a vital source, the shimmering white limestone that really dominates the city's buildings. And then other possible influences upon Piranesi, thinking of Matteo Lucchesi, his uncle, a trained architect who worked for the Magistrato delle Acque. And this was an important branch of government for Venice, in thinking of the hydraulic systems. So in thinking about the Venetian origins of Piranesi, we think of his biographers like Tommaso Tamanza or others, and looking to projects that might have influenced him, looking to the renovations of buildings, as I'm showing you here, the Church of San Simeone e Giuda, as well as the Church of San Rocco. For example, Piranesi, we know, apprenticed on these two projects and would have been exposed early on to the neoclassical language. And no doubt this would have been admired, thinking of the ancient Roman archetypes. So, expanding his network and making contacts with the world of publishing and etching, we know that Piranesi collaborated with Francesco Mutoni on this new edition of Palladio's 4 books of architecture. And so the plates were drawn and etched by Giorgio Fossati, but we know, of course, Piranesi would work and again learn while on this project with this later edition of Palladio's I Quattro Libri. In fact, the late Venetian scholar Leonello Pupi believed that it was through Piranesi's work on this late edition, the Mutoni edition of Palladio, that he learned to modulate the tonality and quality of line that he would later explore in Rome. Okay, so I would like to respond to these works briefly. The Grotteschi from the Prima Parte, also the prison scenes. So Piranesi probably, we know, would have wanted to sell these as discrete works through Bouchard's bookshop. And so we look to, first, the material quality of these etchings. We look to the perceived topography, the capriccio, the imagination of Piranesi. And so the Grotteschi really reveal an exacting process of the etching, but we also observe a discerning texture of lines and technical expertise. So we look here in this case of the Grotteschi. There are half-legible inscriptions, an arrangement of objects, fragments of egg and dart molding, garlands, the arrangement and texture of that really reveal a contemporary Venice. And so perhaps this is to imply a feeling of intense proximity of living and dead forms. So much has been written about the carceri, or the prison etchings, for their intense, dramatic character. Surprising to learn that they didn't sell very well at first. The carceri have quite a complexity and tonality, powerful blend of Venetian memory, al capriccio. And so a near contemporary Piranesi, Giovanni Battista proposed a new theory on new science at the time. The argument is that Piranesi was influenced by Vico's ideas essential to understanding the carceri scenes. And so Vico had put forward this idea that Roman origins were connected to the Etruscans instead of the Greeks, and hence we see Piranesi's inspiration for these powerful etchings. So Piranesi would expand the vocabulary, the elements that we see here, broken ships, sails, masts, wheels, invented spaces that present like monumental stages. All of this to bring to mind this civilization and Vico's theory. Perhaps it is in this way that we may speculate that the carceri are in dialogue with themes of historical reconstruction, or rather, revision. These are just some of the thoughts I had in responding to Piranesi's prints and Venetian fantasy. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Carroll. I would now like to invite Professor Tanu Sankalia to the podium. Professor Tanu Sankalia teaches courses in architectural history and urban planning and design in the architecture program in the Department of Art and Architecture at USF. He is co-editor of Urban Reinvention, San Francisco's Treasure Island, and is currently completing a book manuscript titled Slots, Spaces of San Francisco's Victorian Architecture. Welcome, Professor Sankalia.
Yeah. And then hit you. And then full switch and full screen. There you go.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for inviting me, Kate, everybody from the program, Lori. Thanks all. Thanks for coming, everyone. So my talk is titled Piranesi in 3 phases, and those 3 phases are kind of related to my own engagement with Piranesi, and they somehow relate a little bit to Piranesi's own phases of his career, through his career. So in my 5th year of architecture school, so the first phase is architecture school, and the theme is space. So in my 5th year of architecture school, while working on a design for my final architectural studio, I came across an image of Piranesi, his famous prison drawings from the Carceri series. And I immediately Xeroxed this image and pinned it to the tack board across from my desk, where it remained for the rest of the semester. The image I clearly recall was Carceri 6, the smoking fire. My knowledge of the image was sketchy. I was unaware of the historical significance of the image, by which I was so mesmerized, because the architectural history survey courses we took at the time had skipped over Piranesi. Therefore, my first appreciation of Piranesi's work in hindsight was perhaps imagistic, in the way that I had a direct, immediate and sensory engagement with the visual qualities of the image. And what seized me in the image, and the several others I've seen since, is the astonishing depiction of interior space. The grand monumental scale, the gaping arches with heavy masonry construction, from which wooden trusses spring, ropes, pulleys, and suspended drawbridges, stairs that seem to have no beginning or an end, and the entire scene bathed in sharp contrasts of light and shade. And all I wished at that time was to be able to design an interior space for my project, just like this image. Later I learned that Piranesi's dark inventions, which borrowed from stage set design and from the underground ruins, which he knew so well, created a destabilizing world that forged a sense of confusion and dynamic spatial ambiguity, which is the very opposite of classical order, say compared to the so-called static perfection of Greek temples. I was also unaware that scholars would link Piranesi's Carceri project with the French philosopher Michel Foucault's famous work Discipline and Punish, which examined the brutality of incarceration and state power. But as an aspiring architect, I was in awe of the sheer brilliance of Piranesi's drawings and etchings, his ability to represent architectural perspective so accurately and with such emotive power. What I took away was the strong belief that architecture was fundamentally about the creation of tectonic space, and that the power of architecture resides in space and light, as Piranesi's Carceri drawings amply demonstrate. Phase 2, urban design practice, and the theme is the city. When Piranesi moved to Rome from Venice, he came in contact with the architect and surveyor Giovanni Battista Piranesi, who had been working on a highly accurate survey of Rome. Piranesi's map of Rome, as you can see from this opening page, which has the entire map in small form, the actual Pianta Grande, as it's called, was composed of 12 sheets, had views of Rome at the bottom done by Piranesi, which you can see right at the bottom there, and the putti, of those chubby angels that are holding the scroll of the map at the top, were also drawn by Piranesi. Piranesi's map shows details of plans of churches, theaters, and the courtyards and porticos of buildings, as well as the entranceways and stairways of major palaces. Thus, the white areas that you see on the map represent all the public and semi-public spaces in the city. Most of Rome's courtyards were actually open to the public until the 1970s, I believe. And the hatched areas or black pochés that you see there in the map indicate the built form or the inaccessible parts of buildings. Piranesi's map is what's called a quasi-figure ground drawing. The classic figure ground drawing shows buildings in black poché and all open space as ground in white. By showing the insides of buildings that were accessible, Piranesi was making a brilliant suggestion. Embedded in the map was the way in which one could perceive and experience the spaces of the city, move through them, get into the insides of buildings. The map blurred the inside and the outside, figure and ground. In fact, in some ways, Piranesi's map, accompanied by Piranesi's spaces of churches, like this view of St. Peter's which you see in the exhibition, would have been the 18th century equivalent of Google Maps with a kind of a street view. Piranesi's map was published in 1748, but almost 250 years later, it was to become an important learning tool for urban planners and designers, and a model of how to think about, design, and depict city plans. This is because modern architecture and city planning of the early 20th century had laid siege to traditional city fabrics. In 1924, the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier had proposed to wipe out the historic urban fabric of Paris's Marais district and replace the old buildings and streets with towers in the park. Stark figure surrounded by plenty of open ground. It was the antithesis of Piranesi's way of perceiving and depicting Rome. By the 1990s, as vociferous critiques of modern urban design took hold among practitioners, and I was one of them at the time, Noli's map became an inspiration in the way it presented possibilities of spatial ambiguity and fluidity. Now, Piranesi's urban schemes, his theoretical formal reconstructions of city space and buildings, however, presented a different picture for a contemporary urban designer than what Noli's map offered. Piranesi had depicted the actual marble fragments of the plan of Rome called Forma Urbis, which you see in this etching, and also in the map of one of Piranesi's most famous prints is a map of Campo Marzio, the ancient district used as a military training ground. Piranesi indeed used archaeological evidence to reconstruct what ancient Rome may have looked like, but the map is also part fantasy. Piranesi designed as much of the ancient city as he reconstructed from marble fragments. A kind of a disconnected urban fabric, embellished with the plans of monumental Roman edifices. In addition, Piranesi used the buildings that he had recreated through careful empirical observation to create a kind of recombinant urbanism, a kind of pastiche, if you will, of buildings of ancient Rome brought together in a single view, with no urbanistic logic as such. Much like the modern city, we are left looking at vast areas of ground with buildings as objects in space. The few drawings I've seen that come close to depicting in view what Noli captured in plan are these drawings and etchings of the grand space of the Pantheon, captured from its portico, and perhaps the interior view of St. Peter's, which is on in the show here. And of course, there are other drawings, and so it's very hard to sort of pinpoint, but I feel that that sort of inside and outside that Noli was showing in plan was never something that Piranesi actually, I think, explored in his drawings. So if Piranesi had been able to use his unsurpassed skills of visualization to depict the fluidity of Noli's figure ground, the blurred interior and exterior, to produce a three-dimensional urban map, a Noli map, and I have absolutely no idea what that would have looked like, it could have been an absolutely glorious gift for us to inherit. Phase 3 is teaching architectural history, and the theme is time. In my History of Architecture survey course that covers global architectural history from approximately 1600 to 1950, I explore with my students how modern architecture emerged from the development of new architectural styles during the 1700s, namely neoclassical architecture. In Europe, by the mid-1700s, neoclassical architecture had become the architectural language of the European Enlightenment. The question architectural historians ask is, how did this style that we see in almost every state house in the United States emerge? Part of the answer comes from how European antiquarians depicted the classical world. The classical worlds of both Greece and Rome. The architectural historian Spiro Kostov speaks of two modes of drawing or representation, the topical and the archaeological. James Stewart and Nicholas Revett drew the Parthenon during their 1751-1755 trip to Athens, and their drawings were published years later. In depicting the Parthenon, Stewart and Revett, along with the Frenchman David Julien Leroy, had elevated Greek architecture, which they believed should be the main inspiration and sole point of reference for neoclassical architecture. Their efforts led to the Greek revival style that you see stamped across so many university campuses in Europe and the US. But Piranesi, along with Carlo Lodoli, a Venetian architectural theorist and Franciscan priest, believed in the primacy of Rome. Piranesi, during his first stint in Rome and even later, was the master of the topical mode, the vedute, or views of Rome. But the topical mode is insufficient to fabricate an architectural style. Piranesi, like Stewart, Revett, and others around them, turned to measured drawings, and in a 10-year period, Piranesi, during the 1740s and 50s, Piranesi sketched, measured, drew plans, sections, and elevations of numerous Roman buildings. He undertook a documentary exercise in providing evidence of the glory of Rome, a city that he believed was indeed the cradle of the ancient world. But he had to contend with the Grecians as well as the rigorists, who strongly believed in the faithful reproduction of ancient architectural models for neoclassical buildings. Whether Greece or Rome had greater influence on neoclassical architecture is moot. However, what is certain is that the static rigidity of neoclassical architecture may have indeed benefited, say from Piranesi's drawings of ancient Roman engineering structures that you see here, and certainly from his imaginative power of suggestion, the spatial ambiguity of his carceri, and the deep emotion with which he perceived the ancient classical world. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Sankalia. And last but not least, please join me in welcoming Professor Noopur Agarwal. In addition to directing and teaching in the design program of USF's Department of Art and Architecture, Professor Agarwal is a practicing visual communication designer dedicated to increasing critical and public engagement with issues of local and global concern. Her creative output often takes the form of experiential graphic design in the realm of physical and digital interactive environmental graphics that include brand identity concepts for events, organizations, exhibitions, publications, and advertisements. She actively participates in residencies and fellowships, and her designs have been recognized in international competitions and have been included in invitational and juried exhibitions. Please join me in welcoming Professor Noopur Agarwal.
I know that I'm the digital person here, but I actually don't know how to use PowerPoint.
This makes me feel really good. I'm always the Luddite.
I'm using while Kate is pulling that up, thanks for having me. I will say I was feeling a lot of imposter syndrome following two historians, but then when you see the show, you will also feel imposter syndrome because the work is amazing. So. I'm Noopur. I teach and I direct the design program here at USF. Our program is rooted in graphic design, and I also have my own studio practice that is also rooted in graphic design. As mentioned, my work has a lot to do with branding and experiential design. And when I was looking at the show today and I was learning more about Piranesi, I realized his work and the show is a graphic design show. It's a graphic design of a certain time and place of Rome in the 18th century. And today, because I'm a narcissist, I'm going to make the case that Piranesi is also a brand designer and an experiential designer. He was designing an identity for Rome. He was shaping how people imagined, remembered, and carried the city home. He also amplified a vision of Rome that we still conjure today. Right? So, in contemporary branding, when we're branding for city or nation states, we call it civic branding. And this is when you select, distill, amplify, and create a narrative around a place, as opposed to an object or an organization. That's usually what we associate it with branding. But when you're attaching a visual identity to a place, we in branding call it place branding. And I'm arguing that's exactly what Piranesi was doing. So my students and I teach some of our branding courses here, my students and I lovingly laugh at when you need to make something be associated with San Francisco, what do? You put a bridge on it, all right? And so the first two logos are student work. The other two logos, I think you know, the Warriors, the Valkyries, there's a bridge on it. In our own modern way, in design and in branding, just like Piranesi did, we bend, we stretch, we exaggerate, and re-replicate some of our most famous monuments for representational purposes. Our visual language is vector graphics, color. His was etchings, contrast, black and white. So in thinking about Piranesi's work, I'm drawn to his ability to create a cohesive sense of Rome for a wide audience. And I was thinking about all the instances in the field of graphic design and brand design where I have essentially been asked to create a small world or an experience in the context of a museum or even an online space. So what you're seeing here are images of Asia Society in New York, where I was trying to curate the visitor experience and also trying to establish how this humble museum has a place on Museum Mile in New York. So we have these giant banners that we installed to say, hey, we're here. We're only a few blocks from the Met, but we always get overlooked. So that's trying to establish that we're there. We were thinking about the experience of being on foot and what are you seeing that's going to be in the building. We're thinking about when you open the door, what are you seeing? We're also thinking about once you get into the building, what are you going to take away? What are you going to hold? And what you see in the top left corner is that right? It's like at this age, I'm a baked potato. Like it's, if I don't know my left or right, it's done. We're also thinking about what are visitors taking away, all right? And that's also what Piranesi was doing. Much of his prints were taken as tourist souvenirs. So we're thinking about the guest experience, the visitor experience. Also, once inside the museum, myself and the museum team were tasked with creating these kind of mini worlds or experiences or mini brands for each exhibition that we designed. One exhibition that I continue to work on is an exhibition called Coal and Ice. It's an immersive photography show depicting the enormity of the climate crisis. This has traveled, it started in Beijing, and then went to Asia Society, the Kennedy Center. It was here at Fort Mason. Then it came back to Asia Society, I believe, in 2024. But with Coal and Ice, I was tasked with not only creating a brand for the show, but it's a brand that has to be disseminated across all the various touch points. So the website, the catalog, all of the printed materials, all of the advertisements. So it's this world that has to be created. Creating a brand is creating a world. The other thing I want you to note about like the catalog and the digital website, a lot of what I'm doing, a lot of what designers are doing is thinking about a narrative and a story and how are you inviting a user into that story? How are you presenting information at different levels so that they are engaged with? How do you keep folks engaged? And I see all themes of that in Piranesi's work. There's levels to the work. There's Easter eggs in the work where you look closer. So brand is, to me, what I'm trying to convey is that brand is much more than a logo. It's just one touch point. It's colors, fonts, lettering, copywriting, merch. In Piranesi's case, photography and not in Piranesi's case, but in brand in modern day, we use photography. In Piranesi's case, he's composing how structures are viewed and lighted. There's a very curated point of view. I wanted to share some of USF's brand because we all know USF's brand probably. Most of us know USF's brand here in this room. USF projects a brand to the outside world. But another thing that USF's brand does is help solidify the identity that we know as constituents of the organization. And that's also what Piranesi's work was doing. He was projecting what he wanted Rome to be to outsiders, what their image of Rome was, but it was also solidifying a viewpoint of Rome to Romans. So what I want to finish with is an exercise in creating identity and place here on campus. So in 2019, myself, with a student of ours named Mary Mitchell, and staff members Sean, who I think is here, and Steve Ryan, we embarked on a brand and placemaking project. So the Department of Art and Architecture at USF, which the Museum Studies program is part of, has kind of our hub in X-Arts, which is a basement garage space that has been scrappily put together It's hard to navigate. It's a beloved space, but it's not a space that a lot of us took pride in. It's complex, it's hard to navigate, it's layered, it's multi-use. It needed to be a bit more legible and celebrated, much like Piranesi was doing with his etchings and work in Rome. So we took a visual audit and identified our stakeholders, students, staff, and faculty. What do they need out of the space? What's pain points for them? Stakeholders and users is kind of a techie design term, but it's just a fancy term for audience. And I would argue that Piranesi in his etchings was inviting audience and thinking about audience in everything that he was doing. He was thinking about the tourist European elites. He was thinking about Romans. Anyway, so we identified our area of focus in our project, which was to improve visibility of our department on campus, improve navigation, and improve community. We wanted to curate a narrative of place, clarifying how the department is experienced. And I see in Piranesi's work, I see him curating the experience of Rome in his own way. So we did work on a logo. It included colors, fonts, a logo type, but we more importantly started to take those brand elements and we thought about how they could be used both directionally and decorationally. So using those elements to create an experience within XArts. So what you're seeing here are drawings from the vinyl graphics that are installed on our doors. They help orient people. If you're standing outside there, or this happens every day where somebody comes into one side and I say, oh, no, go to the orange side. Oh, use the blue side. And I say this because they have become our monuments. They have become these graphic monuments, and the monuments that Piranesi was etching and drawing are also these monuments that are used to orient yourself in the city. So there's a very long, scary hallway in XArts. We tried to make it a little bit more inviting with name tags and a directory sign, some vinyl graphics, metal and white boards were put up for pinning up artwork. But we just kept finding opportunities to try and disseminate our brand and vision in like the posters that you see here. So in our own way, we were trying to direct perception and memory of a space on campus. We were thinking about, what do students think about, what are they going to envision once they leave XArts? They spend so much time in our studios and so much time in XArts. What are they going to take away from that? So whether it's 18th century Rome or a modern campus or exhibit, I believe that Piranesi was an experienced designer and a brand designer because it's all about how people are experiencing, navigating, and remembering place.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Agarwal. And if you could please join me in giving a round of applause for our three wonderful speakers. All right, and we will transition to the panel. So if I would like to invite our panelists back up to have a seat at the table. And I would also like to introduce you to our moderator for this portion, Museum Studies graduate student, Dayon Oh.
We're improving our branding.
Oh, yeah.
Should we?
Is there a specific spot you would like to sit?
So we're supposed to.
Okay,
sit on
and
the
then
three
yeah.
there.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I first want to extend a sincere thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining us today. Our panel theme, Constructing Worlds, frames Piranesi as an early world builder. He used the raw materials of history, stone, and memory to construct a version of Rome that is both a historical record and a powerful fantasy. This evening, we'll explore the act of creation, connecting his 18th century prints to the ways we construct worlds today in our physical cities and in our digital lives. Maybe I could start by asking all of you to comment a little bit further on why you chose the topic or works you did for your short talks today, particularly in the context of our panel theme, Constructing Worlds. Are there any ideas or issues that you raised in your talk that you might want to elaborate on further?
You want to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here, you want to put him on mic?
Okay, is this better? Okay.
It's on.
In thinking about why, for example, I found the work of the grotesques fascinating in thinking about the life of objects that were selected and thinking about how that tells us maybe a little bit more about contemporary life, whether it's in Venice or Rome. I think these are interesting questions to be asked, and I found it intriguing.
Shall we move to?
Oh, okay. Is this on?
Bring it closer to you.
Bring it, it is, okay. Really? Yeah. No?
Oh,
I can just project. Can you
Do you want to use
hear me now?
You have to bring
No.
it closer to, really close to your
Really?
mouth.
Like this? No. Okay, so, well, I was trying to find my through line with the work. So as I was arguing, I do feel like Piranesi's work is graphic design of its time. One thing that I didn't get to touch upon a lot was that I'm fascinated by is that the works are tourist souvenirs. Like some of the works are tourist souvenirs that that folks would take away with them. And I think about when I travel and how oftentimes when we travel, like if we're going to a national park or something, I want to get like, oh, the brochure from Yosemite, from the visitor center. And like those are often the ephemera that I keep from my travels. And so I've just been thinking a lot about that. Like, oh my gosh, this is the ephemera of the time, the travel ephemera of the time. And I think that's super interesting. And I think it's interesting that we're still engaging with travel ephemera in that way.
so, yeah, hi. Well, can you hear me now? No.
No.
So, oh, there
Wait,
it is. Now you can, now it's working. Yeah. So you turned it off. I guess. Anyway. Wow. What more could I have said? I think all three topics that I raised, one was the space, the city. The city thing is, the connection between Piranesi and Noli was very interesting, and I would love to sort of explore that a little more, and maybe I will at some point. And I was joking with Nate, who's one of our faculty members, that wow, if we could do a three-dimensional computer generated, maybe AI generated model of Noli's map in three-dimensional form, what would that look like? So anyway, we're just speculating. That's one thing, and the second thing we were just talking earlier that how I don't know, and Carroll, probably you know more, but is that Piranesi probably got sucked into the debate of Rome versus Greece a lot during 1750s, 1760s, because of neoclassical architecture, and they were trying to figure out a language. What was neoclassical architecture going to be? Is it neo-Gothic? Is it neo-Greek? Is it neo-Roman? Is it it ends up being neoclassical, but the whole thing is the Rome versus Greece debate was pretty vociferous during the 1700s, and I think maybe to an extent he got sucked into that debate, and therefore he started representing Rome in a certain way, where to make it the center of the world in a way. And so I think that, yeah, this keeps going on. There's a sort of level of experimentation and freedom in his work that then perhaps recedes to the background a little bit, where he tends to probably become a little more conservative, probably, in the way he was representing his work.
One of the key ideas of the exhibition is that Piranesi makes documentation and imagination to build, in essence, his own view of Rome, his own world based on an imagined past. So his prints straddle an interesting line between historical documentation and fantasy. I'd like to open this up to all three of you. In your field, have you ever come across an artist, architect, or designer who also bridges documentation and invention? And if so, could you describe an example of their work? And whether or not the lines between invention and documentary accuracy were clear between them?
Okay. Going back to the travel ephemera and the souvenirs, there is a studio in UK called Herb Lester and Associates. Herb Lester is just like a funny name that they came up with. It's not actually a person, but it's a collective of designers that create a bunch of travel guides, and they specifically create print travel guides. And all of them are highly illustrative. They're whimsical, though they have ones that are like Rome and Venice. They tend to do things that amplify subcultures. So it'll be like David Bowie's London, and how to experience Brooklyn with heartbreak, and it's highly illustrative, and so the guides. Yes, they're like referencing reality, but they're super curated. And the other thing that they're not shy about, they say this on their website, is when we publish this one guide, it's in print. So we all know that like something in print is dated if, it came out yesterday, right? And a travel guide, most of us are looking up on a website, a blog, a listicle, like to get travel advice. But they're kind of living in, this is what we recommend at this moment in time. And it's a snapshot of a city. It's a curated view of a city. And it reminds me a lot of Piranesi's work in that way. Herb Lester and Associates. Yeah.
All right, this question made me think of a map that was made of Venice in 1500 by the artist Jacopo de' Barbari. He went to Nuremberg to learn printmaking. And also I was thinking about it and listening to your talk as well. It's considered such a precise map for that time. And scholars are still not sure exactly how he created this map. Whether he deployed assistants to climb to the top of bell towers to create perspectival drawings, because it's a bird's eye view, of the city. And so there is sort of this idea of, between documentation and invention. Still, we can go back to it today and try and understand, if we're trying to understand things about Venice, buildings, water lines, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I think in architecture you have almost any architect who achieved a degree of success in their careers wanted to sort of be super inventive and create imaginary cities, imaginary places, and so on. And then many you can name, but one is, of course, if you think of San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake, Daniel Burnham's plan for the city was a lot of it was, it was, he was hoping it would be implemented, but nobody was interested in really implementing, many of his ideas, and many of them were outlandish. But that's one example, just to hear. But they're just there's one of the most famous architects who only did a lot of very very imaginary works was Lebbeus Woods, who actually was born in the early 1940s. He died about 10 years ago, and he did a lot of architectural fantasies, but also that were to do with war and the destruction of war on places. So he did a series of works after the war in the Balkans, which was very interesting work. But yeah, urban plans, so many urban plans which have been, largely imaginary and never achieved. And I think perhaps the most interesting one, which we all, in a way, lived through, is what Le Corbusier came up with. And they were his visions at the time, and the map that I showed of Paris, where he was literally wiping out, and this was an airline company called Voisin, and they were actually built, they used to manufacture airplanes, and they gave him the commission to say, let's do something for Paris. And so he proposed actually these massive towers just off the Seine. But then that became in a way a prototype for his city of 3 million people, where there were elevated freeways, separation of office, creating downtowns, residential areas, office areas, separating land uses. And all that wasn't really built at the time, but if you look around the world today, you see those towers everywhere. And if any of you have been following what's happened in Hong Kong recently, those fires in the 4 towers, I mean, those towers are very much Corbusian towers. And so it's sort of a prototype that got built everywhere, but it was to an extent imaginary at the time that he proposed those.
One of the exhibition's core ideas is how a fragment, a ruin, or a piece of text serves as a catalyst for reconstructing a lost world. We'll discuss how we use fragments of the real world to build new imagined ones, and why these constructed worlds are so powerful. Professor Sankalia, Piranesi's prints became the definitive memory of Rome for many travelers who never saw the city. And in your writing on Wayne Thiebaud's paintings of San Francisco, you argue that fictions are more evocative than truth. You have also exhibited your own drawings of San Francisco street here at the Thacher Gallery. Considering your work on urban reinventions and your own drawings of San Francisco, how do you see the role of the architect or artist in overwriting the reality of the city? Do these invented urban spaces eventually become more real to the public than the bricks and mortar?
Yeah, that's a great. Use this one. Oh, this one's done. Yeah, no, that's. Thank you. That's a great question, and a tough one to answer. But let's go back to Piranesi and just think for a second. I think when he was actually depicting the city that he saw in front of him in different ways. I mean, for example, if you go to the gallery, you're going to see the perspective which he's created of St. Peter's from the inside, but it's not a one-point perspective that's head-on. It's a little to the side, and if you're looking at it from very far away, you can't exactly tell right away that it's St. Peter's. You could think it's a huge portico, it's some kind of a large colonnade, which on the right, when you look at that etching, you'll see, you might think it's open space on the right, you may not even think you're in a fully enclosed space. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's far more effective when Piranesi was creating all these vedute, but of Rome, and then from that you can construct something. But the minute you start sort of inventing something completely, it becomes perhaps a bit problematic. like when he just uses buildings as elements and places them in public space or in space. And so, yeah, I think I think I would err more towards the side of seeing the city, experiencing the city, depicting the city, and of course you can distort it a little bit. But your fundamental representation of the city of architecture is based in what it is, rather than what's fully invented. So you're not inventing something from, out of nowhere, but you're basing your your representation from an actual, entity. So even when Thibault did all those, the many paintings of the streets, and he was living in the 1970s in Potrero Hill and was surrounded by these really steep streets, and so he'd see them, sketch them, go back to his studio, and then tweak them in various ways, and of course exaggerate things, which is also what Piranesi was doing then. We were just talking about it earlier, about the scale. He was exaggerating scale, making humans very small and so on. But it's still based in reality of some sort, not completely invented. And I think from that, one can create a far more powerful vision of architecture or urban or cities based on what's already there and depicting.
Dr. Carroll, Piranesi often treats the ruin as a starting point for fantastical reconstruction. And your research focuses on the early modern Italian domestic interior and how furniture and objects integrate people and spaces. Do these intimate domestic objects you study serve as fragments that help you reconstruct the lost social world of the 16th century? Do they tell a more compelling story than the monumental stone ruins that Piranesi focused on?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. So I really like the ideas of Bruno Latour in thinking about the life of objects and how each object, it generates maybe a pattern, disruption, and so, maybe over time, an object becomes, it moves from its original functionality to something that is non-functional. Certainly going back to early modern object, maybe that's the case, and we sort of drifted to design history here. So I guess the question is, does it become a leftover? And then I'm thinking with Piranesi, so these were, in many cases, souvenirs. So now how do we look at these objects over time? If only these objects could talk.
I'm gonna move to the other question that I prepared for Professor Agarwal. Piranesi wasn't just drawing buildings or ruins, rather his works convey the experience of them. In a way, he was designing experiences by creating his immersive worlds. And you work in experiential design and digital interactivity. What are the shared principles of world building that connect an 18th century printmaker to a 21st century experiential designer? And how does the shift from etching to digital interaction change the viewer's ability to enter or believe in a constructed world?
I think we touched upon this a little bit, like pacing. So it's all about storytelling and how are you going to lead the viewer and keep their attention. And so it's pacing. I see that in the work, Piranesi's work, of you're approaching it and you look closer, and we're doing that in design work all the time. It's like, here's this information and I have to figure out how to get this information to a user how do I move them through the information? And whether I'm designing a book or I'm designing an app, it's all about the pacing. There's also, it's the pacing, it's the story, how are you presenting the information, how are you keeping the audience engaged? I think one of the amazing things I've discovered about Piranesi's work is the Easter eggs that are hidden everywhere, and in design we always try to find like the little areas of surprise and delight that kind of keeps the user engaged in whatever we're doing. And then I think the differences are just the mediums and what you do in those mediums to exploit what you can. And in Piranesi's work, I think of contrast, I think of scale. That's what he was doing with his etchings, really exploiting that. And if we're talking about a digital realm, then it's like, what can you interact with? What can you invite the user to participate in? So I think the medium is dictating the different things, the different devices we use to engage an audience. But I think it's the bigger principles are how are you engaging the audience and how are you telling a story or visualizing a viewpoint.
In our final round, we look at the role of technology. Piranesi is known for his masterful and dramatic use of the technology of his day, such as copperplate etching, to create his immersive worlds. Today we have VR, AR, and AI. As our tools become more powerful, the boundary between fact and fantasy is collapsing. So this is a general question for all of you. What do you think are the greatest opportunities and the most significant dangers this presents for our future memory and the preservation of historical spaces? Professor Sankalia, would you like to start?
I mean, yeah, what do I say?
Do you want me? I can go. I have
Go.
some. Okay. AI. I think the thing that is very scary about AI is in Piranesi's work, we knew there was some fantasy there. We knew that though there was reality, that there was also fiction there. I think the scary thing about AI is it's becoming more unclear when it's a false image, when it's a fake image. And I think that's really scary. And I'm generally I'm scared and skeptical of that. If we want to talk about the positives of AI, I think about image making and how AI has democratized image making. So in my class, I have to spend weeks and semesters long teaching students how to use an Adobe interface like Photoshop or Illustrator or AutoCAD or something like that. But AI has the most simple interface where you just in one search bar type in with plain language, make me an image of this, and within seconds it's created. And so that's powerful. I like that it's democratized image making. I don't feel like as a designer and an image maker I should be the only one that is allowed to do that. So that's kind of cool, but mostly I'm afraid of the fact that we're unaware that an image is based in fantasy.
But isn't there a misconception also sometimes? I just feel like the word AI is not just thrown around very loosely. Like, so for even like maybe 2 years ago we'd say, oh, this is a photoshopped image. As opposed, now it's like AI. I mean, hey, it's not AI. Somebody just took an image and they photoshopped it, right? Or they tweaked it or they altered it. Same with the video, same with the text. But now everyone's this AI. So it's just being used very, very loosely. So yeah, and anyway, that's all I was saying. But in terms of, I just want to go back a step back to sort of the invention you were talking about. I was just thinking, I forgot to mention one phase in architecture, which was high-tech architecture, or really about the whole idea of, there was a whole group in England called Archigram, and they were making these amazing images of plug-in cities and walking cities, and so these are things that you probably see in in like the Star Wars movies, right? The Empire Strikes Back, when you see those huge walking kind of structures which have all these soldiers inside it, right? And I think Lucas was inspired by the cranes at the Oakland and San Francisco ports. So they were making those kinds of cities. And there's no practical application to that, right? So they never really resulted in anything. But they did result in architects learning a little bit about how very technologically sophisticated things can be put together. So you can then extend that and say, okay, maybe the Pompidou Center building in Paris came out of some of that thinking. And so I don't know if there's some similar kind of analogy you can draw in the present where you're doing something technological or AI or whatever you called it, or and maybe that leads to something else in the present. And like I was saying, maybe the three-dimensional Noli map with Piranesi, inspired by Piranesi, that's the project. Elizabeth?
Great, thank you. So we will transition to a brief Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will call on you. And I think we're down on microphones. What we'll do is we'll do an exercise of voice projection. So if you project your voice to us, I'll repeat the question back to you and to all of you as well. So if anyone has a question, don't be shy.
One thing that we had talked about extensively as we were curating the show was sort of the iterative aspect of printmaking that was coming up in Piranesi's work and in printmaking period. But I was wondering if any of you want to speak a little bit more to how that iterative aspect plays a role in any of your disciplines.
So the question is how, if does etching and the discipline with printmaking, with the medium of printmaking, influence or impact or touch on any of your respective disciplines?
I love test prints. I wonder where all the Piranesi test prints went, because I have a couple of test prints of some very famous artists, which they were literally, throwing away, and I happened to be around and I grabbed them. So speaking of the iterative process, but architecture is endlessly, the whole idea of putting a tracing paper on top of something, you're constantly changing it. So you can look at it as layers, right? Where you've drawn something, you put a trace, you put another trace, you put another trace, and you keep improving it. And of course, you can do that now with printouts, also if you're doing it on a computer. But yeah, it's constantly iterative in that sense. That's the layering, Elizabeth?
Well, I guess in general, I think of the reproductive print as being so important to, either improving an artist's career, making them wealthier, maybe in one case. In certain cases, another way in just deploying images.
I think, Tanu, you touched on this a little bit, but what I love about the iterative process that you're seeing in Piranesi's work is it's a function of the technology, the printing technology, and because it's he went back to some of his plates and made some iterations to it, and that's a function of the technology, and the technology, like the Adobe Creative Suite, makes iterating so easy. And now we can argue that AI is making it even easier. And so I think iteration is often tied to the technology. And I think it's a testament to what the technology was that he was using.
Anybody else?
Thirsty and hungry.
There's no question I can ask one more. So I have one final question that may resonate with our faculty and students here at USF. Piranesi was a master of multiple disciplines. He was an architect, an archaeologist, a designer, and a printmaker. In an age of increasing specialization, what can our students, whether in art history, architecture, or design, learn from Piranesi's multidisciplinary approach to constructing a career or a creative practice?
Okay, well, what? Something comes to mind here. I mean, I see it as thinking in the way in which Piranesi worked in all those different modes. It reminds me of some of the post-World War II industrial designers coming out of Italy, working in the same exact way, multidisciplinary, whether they're architects, graphic designers, industrial designers. That seems like that was something very particular to Italy, just in thinking in these narrow terms. And is the question also about practice today in United?
Like creative practice or career making?
Career making. Yeah. Well, I would hand that off maybe to someone in design.
What in the age of what can our students learn? I mean, I guess it's you can create your own world. So like Piranesi is using one medium, but don't be beholden to one medium. Don't be. I mean, I started tonight saying that I have imposter syndrome talking about this, but there's probably through lines in kind of any. It might seem like you might be doing, especially when you're young in your career, I'm like, oh, I'm working over here and I'm working in this subject matter and medium, and then you jump to this other thing, but like you're the through line there, there's probably a through line and it'll probably one day kind of come together. And I guess just try not to box yourself in so much. Like Piranesi has relevance in all of our disciplines up here, so don't think so narrowly about what you're doing or what you're focusing on. There's probably relevance to a lot of different things.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great plug actually for our department. You know, art and architecture. I mean, you can't go wrong, right? I mean, and that's why I encourage all my students. Yeah, in the end, they all have to know the Adobe suite. So you're a graphic designer. You probably have to know how to draw. You can maybe get away with it, but you know, you just really have to know how to draw. And even if you're a solidly practicing architect and you're sitting, you know, or you are at a construction site, and you're just trying to explain something even to the roofer, you have to be able to draw that little thing there. And I'm not talking about drawing, you know, like Piranesi, but even something very basic. So you have to know how to draw. You know, and art history. I mean, and then, you know, you have to know your architectural art history both, and then and architectural design. And so, you know, using AutoCAD and using now all these sophisticated programs, Revit and Rhino, and we had so many before which are gone. These software that have come and gone. You know, I mean, I learned some software years ago which I don't think anyone does. Anybody use 3D Max anymore? No, yeah, they do. Yeah. So anyway, there's so much stuff, but yeah, there's all that, and I think that's the beauty of our department. I think that it has all that together. The art, the architecture, art history, and fine art.
And museum studies.
And museum studies. Art history and museum studies, of course. So, yeah, I think that's the plug. And on that note,
And on that note, this concludes our panel. Our panel discussion, Constructing Worlds from Piranesi's Rome to Digital Realms. Thank you all for being here and for your insights and perspectives. And thank you all, the audience, for being here. And additionally, please join me in giving another round of applause for Professor Kate Lushek and Dr. I'm losing my words. I think it's time to go see the show. With that, we invite everyone to join us at Thacher Gallery for the opening reception.
Thank you.